Chicago, what do you say? It's the CHGO Cubs Podcast presented by DraftKings, America's top-rated sportsbook. Make sure you download the app. Use the promo code CHGO when you sign up. Happy Tuesday. It's sunny in Chicago. Luke Stuckmeyer, Ryan Herrera, Corey Freedman, and Cody Delmendo all with you. And we see the chat is up and ready and going already on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube to the CHGO Sports YouTube page so you don't miss any of our videos or shows. Make sure you give us a like while you're there. And if you're a diehard out there, welcome. If you're not a diehard yet at all, chgo.com, make sure you sign up to become a diehard. Now's the time because we're almost into baseball season. You don't want to miss any of the things that Ryan is writing or Vinny throughout the baseball season. You get to see a lot of them, Ryan, but you don't get to read all of them if you're not a diehard. And then you get the cool card, too.
You get merch
discounts.
Maybe rolling out something coming out. So
event discounts. Yeah. This is the time to become a diehard. Listen, are Cubs fans diehard? Of course Absolutely. They are. So we should have more people in the CHGO Cubs family that are diehards than any other team in Chicago. That's my belief. That's what we're hoping for by the end of the season. On today's podcast, we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about fantasy baseball with Erik Halterman from Rotowire here in just a couple of minutes. And we're also going to do a segment later in the show called Fact or Fantasy, things that might be pipe dreams for the Cubs this season. Is it just a fantasy we have about this team in 2023, or is it something that's factual and will happen in this upcoming season? And we'll have some fun throughout the afternoon. If you're in the chat, thanks for coming. Mike Dobbs back again. And I have to mention him, 50 straight days.
Oh, yeah.
49 straight days.
49 straight days of Mike Dobbs for the...
Might as well go 50 since it was $49.99.
Yep.
The generosity of a $50 super chat on my birthday was something I will never forget it.
Yesterday count in that? No, just don't. Yesterday doesn't count in the 50 days. It's 50 days starting today.
Today.
Yeah.
Today.
Day
49 after today.
49 days to go.
Day 1 of 50.
Welcome to the Mike Dobbs podcast. All right, let's get started with the fantasy baseball because I think it's something that I know a lot of people are getting ready to do their drafts pretty soon. We're going to bring in Erik Halterman. He is the features editor for Rotowire, the host of Rotowire Fantasy Baseball on MLB Network Radio on Sirius XM. Erik, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Great to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I want to get into fantasy baseball. I haven't done fantasy baseball in probably 20 years. The number one reason is it's sort of overwhelming to me compared to fantasy football. So the first thing I want to ask you right out of the gate, we want to get to some Cubs stuff about this too, but I want to know how I can dumb it down for a doofus like me. Like, how can you take something that is very labor intensive and dumb it down for a doofus like me?
Well, the good thing is there is a pretty wide variety of fantasy baseball leagues out there that you could join. There are old school leagues that might go very deep. Maybe you'll go 15 or even 18 teams in one league, or maybe you'll go 12 teams and only look at the NL only. If you know your player pool very well, you'll have an advantage in those leagues, and they can be a lot of fun. But certainly you can play in shallower leagues. You can play in leagues that only require weekly lineup moves. I think that's the really main thing. In fantasy football, you look at your team on Tuesday when you're doing your pickups. You forget to look at your team on Thursday when your guys are on the bench, even though they played in Thursday Night Football, and then you set it all Sunday morning. You can play in a fantasy baseball league where you do your pickups Sunday night, set your team, and you're good to go. Or you can play in a league where you have daily moves and you have to have that daily time commitment. But I'd certainly be looking for a weekly league if you're worried about, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to do this every single day because there's a lot of baseball out there.
That's it. So I didn't even know that there were weekly ones out there. So that's advice right out of the gate for somebody like me where I could say, all right, I can do that. I can make picks once a week. But every day it's hard to do. Now, if you're doing the everyday thing or the weekly thing, do you have somebody that's on the Cubs roster or multiple players on the Cubs roster that might be helpful to somebody as they're going through the draft, especially against if you're doing it with friends around the country that might not know the Cubs specifically? Is there somebody you're watching on the Cubs this year where you say, yeah, that guy's going to be a good pick?
For me, it's Christopher Morel. I've been targeting him everywhere. Obviously not in the most shallow leagues because we're not 100% sure how often he's going to play. But if you're in a, maybe 12-team or deeper league, absolutely Christopher Morel is somebody who's got most of the skills. You're in the part of the draft when you're thinking about him where you're not finding guys who have everything put together. But what Morel showed last year with really jumping over AAA, basically, I don't even think he played a single AAA game last season. But he showed power, he showed speed. He didn't show a lot of contact, but again, you're not going to have everything at that point in the draft. He's somebody where if he adds contact, you could get a huge profit from where you're picking him. But even where he's going already, you're going to get some power and some speed. And with a guy with defensive versatility like him, I just don't care that he isn't necessarily the top of the depth chart guaranteed at any one position. If you're the second guy in the depth chart for 7 positions, you're going to play, 4 times a week at least early in the season. And then when anybody gets injured, which unfortunately the Cubs already may be dealing with some of those, he's the next man up. So he's a guy I'm looking at, especially because in a lot of fantasy leagues, speed matters quite a bit. If you play in a points league, maybe steals won't be emphasized quite as much in your league. But if you play in a categories league where you're just trying to have the most homers, RBIs, runs, batting average, and steals among your hitters, guys with speed, and Morel should have a decent amount of speed this year, get a big boost in fantasy.
Interesting. So you like Morel over even a guy like Wisdom who would give you the home runs because he gives you more categories, or am I putting words in your mouth saying you like him over Wisdom?
Oh. I just lost the sound there, so I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that.
That's all right. Can you hear me now? We lost. Erik lost our sound for a second, so we're hoping if he can get it back. You get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
If you had to tell me one of those two guys, I was surprised by his Morel answer because I'm not sure he's going to be starting, and B, I would have thought you would want somebody with that's great at something, right?
Yeah.
That gives you a lot of home runs or gives you a really good batting average. But he's saying no, he gives you a little bit of everything sprinkled around. So later in the can you hear us now, Erik?
Yep, we're good. Sorry about that.
Okay,
you're good.
Sorry, I was just following up with that. I was saying, so would you take him if you had a spot still left on your team? Would you take Morel over Wisdom? Because to me, that as a novice, I would say, well, Wisdom will give you more home runs probably. But you're saying because he sprinkles it around that might be a better choice.
Yeah, it's going to be format dependent. Some formats, you really just want the power guys. If you're playing in, again, a lot of points leagues, you get a lot of points for homers, RBI, extra base hits, that sort of thing. But in a categories league, both of them are really going to probably hurt you in batting average. And the extra speed that Morel gives is going to be a boost over Wisdom.
Interesting.
So I'm wondering, Morel may be like a more of a sleeper pick kind of thing. Yeah. But there are obviously going to be a few guys that people are high on the Cubs. Which of those guys do you think, he's going to meet those expectations? Like, he's coming in, people are high on him, and he's not going to disappoint.
Dansby, Nico, Bellinger, those types.
Right,
the bigger names.
Yeah, it's interesting because Cody Bellinger is probably one of the most divisive guys right now in fantasy baseball, and I wish I could count myself as somebody who was particularly high on him. But, man, there's just so much risk there. And he's still going a little bit too early, maybe in the particularly shallower league where he does fall near the end of the draft. But I just don't want to be in a position where I can't afford to cut him if it doesn't work out. I did like Seiya Suzuki a lot, but a little bit nervous now. So I think maybe over on the pitching side, I think Justin Steele is somebody who's going quite late in drafts, who showed more than maybe the broader baseball world was aware of late last season. I think 3.18 ERA on the year for him, which was backed pretty well by peripherals, but he's not somebody who had a ton of hype coming into the year. I think you can get him pretty late in your draft, and he's going to be a totally solid back of the rotation guy.
Is there a general strategy that you take going into a fantasy baseball draft when you do it? I think of my fantasy football, and I say, well, most people now have adopted the strategy of, I can wait for a quarterback until 7th round or later. Now, there might be outliers for that, and then you go running back, wide receiver heavy in the draft. Does that type of strategy exist in fantasy baseball? If so, what would be your general strategy?
I think the main thing to think about there is how much risk do you want to take on with your pitching staff? Do you want your ace to be Jacob deGrom, who might have the best performance on a per start basis, but might make 10 starts, 15, 3? Who knows what it's going to be? So a lot of it's going to depend on your league size. If you're in a smaller league, that means the players available on the waiver wire are really good. So you can take shots at guys like deGrom early, maybe Spencer Strider, who has ridiculous strikeout stuff, but what kind of workload is he going to have in his second year as a starter? Later on in drafts, maybe like an Andrew Heaney, who will get you a ton of strikeouts, but is prone to blowups. So it's really about, do you want guys who are going to have a few amazing starts, and man, if it all works out, they'll give you 30 plus? Or do you want guys who are those solid innings eaters? And a lot of that is going to depend on the depth of your league. Some of it also depends on, honestly, how good do you think you are? If you think you know baseball better than the rest of the people in your league, take on a bit more risk, because you're going to find that next guy on the waiver wire. Maybe you're more plugged in, you're listening to podcasts, you're subscribed to Rotowire, whatever it might be. If you think you're going to get the next guy, by all means, take the guys who flash tons of strikeouts, but who aren't entirely reliable. Let everybody else take the fine starters who they'll stick with all year, while you rotate through those high risk, high reward guys. But again, it really depends on the size of your league, and if you think that honestly you are going to beat your league mates to those best starters on the wire.
Obviously for like rookies, Corbin Carroll, Gunnar Henderson are like big names. Obviously the Cubs don't have that kind of, I guess, upside or ceiling, but they do have some rookies that are going to make their debut and could be good, like maybe not necessarily in the draft, but maybe in-season pickups. Guys like, if Hayden, I think Hayden Wisniewski might not start the year with the Cubs. Is he worth drafting even though he might not start with the Cubs? Do you think he can make it to the waiver wire to where you could then pick him up then? Or, even other guys like Matt Mervis, Brennan Davis as well. It's all kind of like, we don't really know if they'll make the team or not for opening day. Are they worth waiting on?
Yeah, in a deeper league, Wisniewski is getting a ton of hype. As long as you're in a league deep enough where you can afford to take guys who aren't guaranteed to start, absolutely, Hayden Wisniewski has shown more than enough to be worth taking that chance. In a shallower format, of course, you probably have enough guys to choose from who are locked in and have talent. But absolutely, Wisniewski's somebody I'll be following, taking him already near the ends of drafts. And again, you could just drop him if he doesn't get that starting spot. There's going to be somebody who's not a whole lot worse there. So somebody I'm definitely interested in late in drafts. Matt Mervis, fantasy community was very excited about him in November, December. Everybody was all ready for him to come up. And I actually be curious, what was your guys' impression, say in September, was the feeling around Cubstown that, yeah, he's the guy next year? Because, man, they brought in Trey Mancini, Eric Hosmer, Edwin Rios. Everybody's kind of sad about that on the fantasy side, because I think we were all ready for Matt Mervis to take over and be the guy.
Yeah, I think if you had a league that rolled over and had Mervis, you'd be pretty pissed when they
Yes.
maybe not when they signed Hosmer, but definitely when they signed Mancini. You're like, okay.
Rios gets added in spring training. Yeah. I would say like it was one of those where we kind of expected an addition, just because it's like we probably didn't want to see Matt Mervis take over the first base spot all by himself. But then they went and added three veterans who can play first base instead. So it was a little. It went from like, you're like, okay, Matt Mervis is going to get his shot, to like, okay, now when is he actually going to play?
Right. Worst case scenario, you thought he was platooning.
Right. Yeah. But that said, though, Hosmer is being paid by the Padres and Red Sox to play for the Cubs. They're on a veteran deal. We don't even know if he'll make it through the entire year. And then obviously Mancini can play corner outfield. They can DH him. So that's kind of what brought me to that question is, will Mervis still get drafted, or is he going to be more so on the waiver wire in most leagues? Because he's I think he could be up in like May,
Yep, absolutely. So he's fallen to a reserve round pick. You're not going to want to take him at a spot where he has to start. But if you're in a deeper league and you think he's got a shot to come up in May, absolutely, I think he's useful. If you're playing in, say, a dynasty league or a keeper league, still perfectly happy with Matt Mervis. But if you did a very early draft, say in November or December, and you took him, pretty sad about how things have turned out.
We have a question from our chat. Our guy Mike Dobbs wants to know, in a points-to-points or in a head-to-head points league, what do you think about taking Judge over Otani with the first overall pick?
So a lot of that's going to depend on how your league treats Shohei Otani. Some leagues treat him as one player, which, is realistic. In real life, he is, in fact, one human being, as much as it seems like he might be two. Other leagues have just split him up and say you can draft the hitter or the pitcher. We're assuming that this is one of those leagues where he's one player. I think then it also is going to depend. We were talked earlier about those weekly versus daily moves leagues. If you have a league where you have to set your lineup every week, you have to pick whether Otani is a hitter or a pitcher this week. And that means you aren't getting both guys. And there I probably would go Judge. But if it's a league where you have daily moves, then, hey, he's starting on Monday. Well, he's a pitcher on Monday. And then the rest of the week, he's a hitter. Then you really have gotten two players with one lineup spot. I think every single league with daily moves, there's basically no reason to pick anybody but Otani, because you're getting, maybe he wouldn't be the first overall player if you split those two players in half, but he'd be the 10th and the 25th or something like that. So any league where you can basically fully use all of Otani's stats, I think there's no question that he's the number one guy. But if you have to pick, I have Judge number one in most leagues.
Yeah, he's saying daily moves, he's one player.
Yeah.
He's one player. I never even thought about that. Like, obviously, if you get to use him, you only have to make one selection for a player, and you can use him as a pitcher and a hitter. How could you draft anybody else, right? You're getting a 2-for-1. Yeah. So, well, that's the way the Cubs should look at it when he becomes available in free agency, in my opinion. But that's another story.
That's a fantasy for sure.
Erik, how do you evaluate guys that have changed teams, whether it's Bellinger or Swanson or Taijuan, like anybody that's on a different team? Like, their stats clearly were different with another franchise. Now you're going to a team that may not be as successful as those three teams. How do you factor in where guys were and where they are now?
Yeah, there is this notion that maybe you shouldn't pay up for the stars in the first year of their big contracts. I think some people are a little bit scared that there'll be a letdown after guys have made their money. I don't factor that in a ton, but it's a small thing. I don't know how much it applies for not the elite guys. So maybe a Trey Turner, you'll discount a little bit. I'm not sure if the Taijuans and Bellingers of the world matter too much there. For guys that have changed teams, though, in guys like Bellinger's case, you're really wondering, maybe hearing a new set of voices will finally unlock things. I think, unfortunately, I have more faith in the Dodgers unlocking things than the Cubs. So maybe there's going to be something with Jason Hayward very late in drafts here. But in general, for guys who haven't had careers as exciting as Cody Bellinger, I guess we could put it that way to be friendly, you're mostly looking at park factors. So did they move from a pitcher-friendly park to a hitter-friendly park? And that will adjust their value in one way or another. Or did their lineup change? Did they used to be surrounded by very bad players? Now they're surrounded by much better players. That will affect how many runs and RBIs and how many total plate appearances they'll get, because their teams will keep coming up. So mostly think about whether or not the team context change, except for, and again, in those few cases where you're wondering, hey, maybe, change of scenery unlocks something.
Cool.
That's just a good question in the chat from Trevor. Thoughts on the Cubs closing situation? Like, is the community assuming Michael Fulmer gets those opportunities at least to start, or is the Cubs a situation where you're just like, this is going to be too many guys, like, don't even bother?
Yeah, it's probably one of the ugliest closing situations out there, and I think most people are just not dealing with it unless they really feel like they have to. I've taken very late shots, maybe like Brad Boxberger. I think I drafted a draft last weekend. Maybe he gets there, but there's a decent chance nobody gets even 15 saves on the Cubs. And for relief pitchers in fantasy, you're mostly just drafting them for their saves because they just aren't throwing very many total innings. So it'll be one to watch. It's probably the bullpen that I've been tracking the most in the first few weeks of the season. That and a few others. It's one of the most wide open out there. But it's not bad. I think whoever gets that Cubs closer job is definitely going to be a viable enough option. Mm-hmm. It's just who really stands out from that pack.
And it's also when, because like last year it was the same situation, and then David Robertson very quickly earned that like de facto closer job, and obviously was getting the most save opportunity. So I do think it's like what you're saying is it's like a volatile situation. You don't know who it's going to be, but then someone may win it a few weeks into the season, and they have the potential to be really good closers.
Yeah, and often the way this goes is whoever is closer tomorrow is just the guy who didn't blow the last save in a situation like this. So honestly, if whoever gets the first save, you might just go pick him up because there's a very good chance he's the guy, even if when David Ross calls him into the game, he's not thinking of him as the guy.
One last question from AMW Chicago in our YouTube chat. Who's the rookie you're drafting if you have to draft a rookie in every league you're taking?
Well, it was Andrew Painter, the pitcher for the Phillies, but now there's maybe some elbow trouble. Grayson Rodriguez, though, is the pitcher for the Orioles. Very excited about him, showing what he can do. I liked Painter more because you didn't have to pay as much for him in drafts because he was a little bit less certain, but he's having some elbow troubles this spring. I think Grayson Rodriguez is extremely talented, and it looks like he's going to have a very good shot to start right away. Again, though, it's going to depend on leagues. In deeper leagues where you really need as many innings as possible, it's harder to rely on these rookie pitchers because the way teams manage guys these days, they're just not letting rookies throw 200 innings. But in a league where you want per game, per inning production, that sort of thing, I think Grayson Rodriguez could be an excellent choice.
Great. Erik Halterman from Rotowire features editor, and we really appreciate your time, Erik. This was fun, and I hope we can do it again in a couple weeks or throughout the season because most of the stuff you told us, I had no idea about any of it. I'll be totally honest. So
and we know with sports, things change all the time.
That's
so
right.
We're going to need new strategies and new stuff with baseball. So
thanks, Erik.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me on. And I think I was supposed to plug before I left. You can go to rotowire.com/CHGO and get a free trial. I think CHGO should be easy letters for you guys to remember.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good.
We appreciate it. And I'll tell you more about the free trial they've got going on coming up in a second. But first, Cody's going to tell us about Goose Island, our favorite beer. Honk, honk.
Yeah, I mean, Goose Island is the official beer of CHGO and Chicago's beer since 1988. Our friend Zach in the chat here, he says he's from Illinois. You can get some Goose Island, and you can drink that while you watch your shitty Cardinals.
Ouch.
They got the Blackhawks Pale Ale, the Bull City 312, Bourbon County Stout, Christmas IPA, Beer Hug IPA series, which I keep hyping up. You can get the tropical one that's 9.9% alcohol. I mean, just beam me up, Scotty. Let's ride. The Green Line Matilda. It is the best. If there's anything Chicago, it is Goose Island. Goose Island's two local locations are open and ready to welcome you. Grab a beer right from their innovation tanks at the Goose Island Tap Room at 1800 West Fulton. Or get a smash burger and a fresh beer of the week at the original Clybourne Brewhouse at 1800 North Clybourne. For reservations and pickup, go to gooseisland.com/locations. Goose Island Beer Company.
One of our partners that we're so proud to be partnered up with, and Rotowire, another one. Erik was great. I thought he had some great insight. I said, Barb's already saying, bring him back. I want to know about Brendan Davis. Does he have value? Well, let me tell you, it's baseball season. Get your fantasy baseball news from Rotowire, a pioneer in fantasy sports for more than 25 years. Cheat sheets, customer player rankings to fit all leagues, rotisserie, points, 10 category, 30 category. Let their experts analyze all the wild baseball stats for you. WRC plus, I still don't know what it means. Barrel rate, sleepers, prospects, hard hit rate, etc. Mock drafts galore, ask the expert function, premium fantasy draft kits, custom start, sit, add, drop, trade advice, lineup optimizers. You can access to fantasy, DFS, sports betting articles, and not just baseball too. Fantasy advice on everything, golf, soccer, NASCAR, XFL. For a limited time right now, Rotowire offering a free 2-day trial to our listeners. Just go to rotowire.com/CHGO to register. No commitments. They're so confident you're going to like their product and want to invest in a subscription plan. They don't even ask for a credit card up front. So take a peek behind the paywall, and when the trial is done, then you can decide if a Rotowire package is right for you. We're going to continue the fantasy level. The word fantasy carries over to segment 2. It's not fantasy baseball we're talking about, but are we talking about fantasy dreams we have for the Cubs this season? So let's throw out some ideas, things we've talked about already on this podcast, the CHGO Cubs podcast, maybe some we haven't, some things we've seen in the chat. Are they fact or are they fantasy? Are we living in a fantasy world because we're starting to buy this storyline? So the first one that I just saw from the chat, I didn't have this in the list of things I wanted to bring up, but I saw it come up way earlier in the chat, and I think it was Matt Gregory said the Cubs will sign an extension with one of these guys.
Oh, we got it up.
Fact or fantasy?
A little up. Sarah.
Up even higher.
Here we go.
Fact or fantasy? Hap and
Right
or Nico Horner, one of those two will get an extension before the season starts.
I think fact on Nico, fantasy on Hap.
That's an optimistic
so
outview
you're saying
from
if
Corey
it's
Freedman.
at least, if it only has to be one, you think it's a fact. One of them will get
You
done.
said this season? Because I feel like
Going
Nico
into
doesn't
the-
have to be now. But
Going into this season, one of them will get an extension.
I
Ugh.
kind of want to say fantasy on both. I think it is kind of late, and I'm like, Jed has talked about he doesn't want things going into the season, but he also talked about he didn't really want stuff to go into spring training, and we're here now, right? So, like you just said, Nico doesn't technically have to be now, and by not extending him now, you run the risk of him having another breakout year and raising his price even more for an extension next year when you only have 2 more years of club control. So you do run that risk, but technically he doesn't have to be extended now. Ian Happ is the one you do. Do the Cubs want to extend him? They've talked about they like having Ian Happ in-house. Ian Happ wants to be a Cub, but that doesn't mean both sides are going to come to an agreement. And it's not just on Jed. It is on on Happ's camp too. They both have to agree on a number, whether it's Jed lowballing or Happ thinking he's worth more than the Cubs think he is. Like
You might see what Benintendi got and be like,
yeah,
free
right. So-
agency seems like the right move for me.
So you don't know. First of all, you don't know which side the numbers, the bad numbers coming from. It could be coming from both sides. They just like it's kind of like arbitration where they have to meet in the middle on a number, right? So for Hap, it feels like unless he gets what he thinks he's, especially coming off an All-Star Gold Glove year, like his price has gone up, and now that guys are starting to fall off the board of potential free agents, his stock is rising too. So. I kind of want to say fantasy on both just because we're getting, we're already into the second week of March, and we're getting closer and closer to opening day, and kind of have to. Negotiating during the season is hard, and we've seen that with other former Cubs. So
I'm just with you because I think I think that they can find a common ground with either of these guys. I think the Hap one is tough though, right? Because the front office is going to look and say, okay, he's obviously coming off a very decorated year. He kind of put everything together for a full year, right? But prior to that, his seasons had been usually tales of multiple seasons, right? Parts were really good, parts were really bad. So from the Cubs camp, maybe they're uneasy about certain terms he might want. And from Hap's perspective, he's going to say, I just put everything together. I'm 28 years old. And as you alluded to, like, guys keep coming off the free agent board. Like, he's a top 3 offensive player, I think, in the market next year. Like, so I don't know that just because that's the case doesn't mean he can expect some crazy contract or that that's what he's asking for. But it's a situation where I feel like the sides might have differing views of where the player is. But Cody and I were talking, like the article that Mark Feinstein wrote about the situation with Ian Happ. I mean, it's like you could have copy and pasted that article for Wilson Contreras or Anthony Rizzo and literally just changed the name of the player.
Yeah.
And the quotes are the same. I want to be a Cub, but we have to find the right thing.
it's what Happ was saying last year
it's
too,
the
even
same
though it
thing.
wasn't his walk year,
So
I'd say it's fantasy at this point.
Either one. For this season.
Yeah. I'm done getting my hopes up, man. It is what it is. We'll see.
All right. How about the Cubs will be better both defensively and on the base paths than they were last year. Now, we look, obviously, at the defensively part, and you say, well, they have a combined 9 Gold Gloves now on this team defensively. If you add them all up for multiple guys at multiple positions. Should be much better. Cody Bellinger in center. The defense up the middle should be really good. You assume they've replaced Wilson behind the plate with defensive-minded catchers first. Base running was not a strength of this team last year. Fact or fantasy, the Cubs will be better at both this season?
I'd go fact. I think we can clearly see where the defensive improvements, on paper at least, have been made. And you have to show that on the field, of course, but it does feel like they have across the board just either upgraded defensively or stayed where they were at, which was good. Like, they didn't upgrade in left field because Ian Happ was a Gold Glover last year. It's not like they needed to upgrade there. But for most of those positions, they brought in Bellinger, Swanson. You don't know really what you get at third base yet, but we'll see if Patrick Wisdom can have a little better year like he did in 21. If Morel's arm takes a leap, if Nick Madrigal shows that he's at least a steady, a guy that can play there not every day, but just when they need him to be there and make the plays he needs to make. I think defensively they've overall improved. The base running is weird. I don't know how the pizza box bases are gonna really affect it, but I do know the Cubs were like third or fourth in stolen bases last year, so they were really good at that. It was the outs on the base pass that really screwed them up last year, and maybe just adding a little bit more experience to this team might help with that as well.
Right. Are the pizza boxes square cut on top, or are they triangle slices?
It's tavern style.
Yeah,
tavern style. Well, then they might be better.
But you don't know they're better because they don't have the map of Italy on there.
That's right.
Like,
and are they burning the crust?
They'd be at their best
on
if they had
purpose.
that.
Defense-wise, I would expect them to be better. I felt more confident in that when we were kind of expecting Seiya to start the season and be out there every day in right field. Now that you might have more of a mishmash out there for however long that is, it's a little hard to project. But I mean, they're definitely going to be better. They have one of the best defensive shortstops in the league, and they now moved an elite defender in Nico over to a position that he ought to win a Gold Glove at. So they're going to be better in that regard. You mentioned it. They were second. I'm a Fangraphs man, but Baseball Reference has outs on the bases. So second in the league for outs on the bases, second worst in the league, ahead of only the Tampa Bay Rays in terms of outs on the bases. And this was not the Cubs in Tampa were pretty hot, like ahead on the list. 10 outs separated the Cubs and Dodgers from second and third place for the most outs on the bases. They have to be better at that. That's one of those things that's a little difficult to predict. Cody Bellinger rates as a really good base runner. I think Dansby is a really good base runner. Harder to predict, though, because sometimes that's just situational. I would say fact, but it's also one of those things, it has to be a fact. They cannot continue to be that bad. They were so sloppy at times last year. And as we've talked about, like, evaluating David Ross and getting toward discussions about how they view him and how long his contract is, you cannot have year after year after year where you're not disciplined in that way. And if it's a result of trying to steal bases, that's one thing. That was not always what it was last year. They were getting caught at third.
Chris Bryant was a great base runner.
Excellent base runner.
He wasn't the fastest guy, but he
was a great base runner, and Javi had
really
those
good at going
instincts.
from
He may
first
not
to
have been
third.
as traditionally, but he was.
One thing I will say with last year, and I this doesn't go for every single out on the base pass, but I think that team just they didn't have the power or the extra base power that they needed to just score runs from first. They were trying to manufacture more runs, and to their detriment, a lot of times they were trying to force the issue, trying to manufacture runs by just overall being more aggressive on the base pass.
They had to take the risk.
They added some. They didn't add all world hitters this season, but Dansby Swanson, you hope adds a little bit more pop in that lineup. Trey Mancini too. I mean, if Erik Halterman, if this shift really does so, like he can get. I'm just throwing names out there, but overall, the hope is that the Cubs have added enough extra base hitting that they can knock some of those runners in, that they don't have to try to go first to third on every single to right field, right? Or try to score second to home on any single that goes to the outfield.
Bases are closer now.
But there's just opportunity. The Cubs hope there's more opportunities for them to not have to force the issue and be as aggressive on the base pass, which may benefit in that reducing the outs on the bases that they had last year.
Yeah, I'll go fact. It's pretty clear that the roster overall is better, and that's honestly, that explains it enough.
It should play out that way.
Should play out that way.
Now, here's a good one. I think Tucker Barnhart and Yan Gomes will combine to hit more home runs than Wilson Contreras in St. Louis. Those two guys, I saw Mike Dobbs saying he thinks Yan Gomes will have a better season than Wilson Contreras, just straight up. I'm asking.
He's drinking the juice that I like to drink.
Well, if you're evaluating the whole player, I could see how he's going to argue that.
Defensively, for sure.
I mean, the Cubs have made this decision because of calling games and working with young pitchers, yada, yada, yada. We've beaten that like a dead horse.
Right.
So, right? Like, I mean, that's the reason they made the decision. But if we're talking about just offensively, can those two guys combine? Will they combine to hit more home runs than Wilson Contreras? Fact or fantasy?
I asked this question because I like to stir stuff up. Not as much as Cody, but I do like it.
You sure?
No, I mean, Wilson has never been a crazy home run guy, right? You're probably looking at mid-20s in a really good Cardinals lineup, hitting
ballpark.
around those guys. I would think if he is healthy and playing all year, he's going to get at least to 20 to 30, somewhere in that range. So I think the only way this answer is yes is if Wilson just falls off a cliff for some reason or is not healthy.
I was going to say the other way it could be possible is that if they try to play him in the outfield more often and his body's not ready to be running around and playing the outfield.
So, I'm not rooting for that, but it is a legitimate possibility. You'd have to go back a few years, I think, for Barnhart, his last double-digit season. So, I think
he had one home run last year, right?
Yeah,
like that?
right. So, if you combine the best years from Gomes and Barnhart, it's possible, but that's too many games, and so no. But I wanted to stir some stuff up. So get Cody going on a Tuesday?
I don't know. The Godfather Michael Collada. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, Michael Collada makes it worthwhile just on its own, just so you don't miss any of the comments and any of the live. Mm-hmm. He's had some real good ones in the chat today about fact or fantasy. I think the first one was fantasy. Ricketts will pay someone.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that Contreras will probably have a better offensive year than Barnhart and Gomes combined. Home runs wise, I mean, listen, I'm looking at Wilson Contreras. The most games he's ever played in a season was 138, and that was in 2018. Then he went 105, 57, 128, 113. So can you get 120 games out of him? He'll be in a better lineup. I mean, the Cardinals lineup is no joke. It might be a top 3 lineup in all of baseball, and that's very nice of me to say. I'm gonna go
very generous.
I'm gonna go jump into Lake Michigan after saying
he's right,
that.
but I just don't
Cody
expect
Del
him to say
Generous.
it. Yeah.
It's very nice of me to say.
Cody Del Cardinal.
Don't ever say that.
He's going to kill you. Yeah.
I'm going to need you.
Oh, that was a cuss word.
I'm going to need you to go out on the balcony and jump off
this
it.
podcast is about to get derailed.
Cody swears enough on this podcast. You don't need to trigger him like that.
Y'all like to give me shit because I'm optimistic and I won't look at I will do almost anything to spin something the Cubs' way.
Right.
I said a fact there, and it is true that the Cardinals lineup is going to be very, very good, especially when Jordan Walker gets called up. And I hate saying it out loud. So again, because of their lineup already being very good, Contreras it's only going to help. It's only going to help him offensively if he stays on the field. I think the question for this particular thing is, can Contreras stay on the field?
I was gonna say, I think if he just repeats last season, then he blows Yan Gomes, and as far as home runs, blows Gomes and Barnhart
for sure.
Water.
But again, we've seen those guys. They can get into it. Barnhart hit 11 one year in 2019. It's not been too long since then. I don't know. Again, I think those guys could easily put up 8 to 10 home runs each. I think they easily could do it.
All right, how about this one? Taijuan or Stroman will lead the Cubs in wins this season. Oof. So if you're saying fact, you're taking one of those two guys to lead the team in wins. If you're saying fantasy, you're getting all of the other guys as a shot to lead the team.
Oh, for some reason I thought you were asking between Taijuan and Stroman.
No, I'm not even making you choose between the two of them. I'm letting you say they're the two most likely guys. One of them will lead the team in wins. Or you could say Steele Wesneski, Sampson, whoever else you might want to take.
Luke, you love pitcher wins. You're a big pitcher wins guy.
If a guy wins 18 games, then it's not a number that's ridiculous.
Sure.
But if you're just showing me somebody that has 6 wins in a season, then very rarely does that have any factor in whether or not that guy had a good season, right? Like it can go too many different ways with other numbers. But if somebody has a 20-win season still holds up to me as a guy had a pretty good year.
I'll probably go with fact. I think those are going to be your top 2. Like Steele has definitely an argument. Hendricks isn't going to be ready for the start of the year, so that just kind of takes him out of the running a little bit. Just off the bat, Wesneski, and we don't know how long we don't know if he starts the year in the majors or AAA. Sampson, you don't know how long he sticks in that rotation. Like there's a bunch of different question marks with other people.
What's nasty?
Yeah, but Taijuan and Stroman, as long as they're healthy, feel like those guys are going to be at the top of the rotation the whole year. And I think they're good enough to make those like 30 starts in the year, as long as they're healthy, and should be good enough to give the Cubs a chance to win more often than not. And that's just kind of that's how pitcher wins go, right? If you can get your 6 innings, 7 innings, and keep your team in it, then you have a good shot at winning that game.
I think Taijuan has a really good shot to be a guy who can give the Cubs a lot of innings. I mean, he had 170 some last year, so yeah, I could see him leading this team in wins. So I'll take fact.
Everybody's going fact.
Me too. I think it's Taijuan. Yeah.
Wow, Taijuan.
Well, and it's
sweeper slider.
He's looked good.
And you brought it up. I mean, it doesn't matter like what anybody thinks about pitcher wins. It's just a fun question. But like I think the Cubs are also a unique situation where it's that gets a little cloudier, right? You just expect them to play so many close games. That's just kind of the expectation, that they're not at that stage where Jed wants them to be, where they're blowing teams out on offense and stuff like that. You also are set up bullpen-wise where you have multiple of these guys that can go 2-3 innings at a time, and you're planning to kind of deploy it that way, which if we're talking about wins, that's what screws that up, right? Is, hey, it's, the 4th or 5th inning, do we want to let Hayden Wesneski or Adrian Sampson or whoever it is go through the order that 3rd or 4th time, or do we want to bring in Keegan Thompson to shut things down for 2 innings? That's where, and then you're talking about one-run games, like that's where a stat like that gets kind of crowded and more difficult to predict. But I would take Taijuan if I were picking one person.
It does feel like, I didn't think of that, but like some of those guys at the back end of the rotation are what you expect. Maybe more likely to have those piggyback kind of games where a Keegan or Adbert relieves them for 3 innings, whatever. A guy like Stroman or a guy like Taijuan feels like they're going to be out there to go as deep into the ball game as they can. Like no pre-planned piggyback, like get us 7 innings or whatever, or do your best to do that, and then give it to the back end of the bullpen kind of thing.
I was going to do St. Louis is the most boring city in the division, but I've decided not to do that one because we all know it's true. Let's go with
roasted.
Mervis, Brendan Davis, Madrigal, or Morel. One of those 4 players will emerge as an everyday starter for the Cubs by the end of the season. Like, that will carry over into next year.
An everyday starter
Matt Mervis.
One position?
No, because Morel could be an everyday starter. Yeah, I would say if you want to consider for Morel or Madrigal, if you want to consider them a guy that starts at least 4 days a week, 5 days a week, that I would consider that an everyday starter.
Okay.
I'll go fact. I think Mervis will be. I think by the end of the year, I think Mervis will be We'll be like Mervis is the guy at first base.
By the end of the season.
By the end of the season.
And into next season. This time next year, you won't have any question.
I think
Mervis is your first baseman.
Yeah, just because we don't even know if Hosmer will make it through the entire year with the Cubs. Mancini can play multiple positions, also DH, and he's getting older anyway. And he's mainly here as like a veteran presence, and it's a 2-year deal. I just think that they brought those guys in to help kind of groom him and help him understand what it's like to be a major leaguer and help him along the way when he goes through those bad stretches. So I think Mervis, it's his job to take by the end of the year. Once he gets up, which, like I said to Erik when we were talking to him in the first segment, I think he could be up in May when it's starting to get a little bit warmer, and say Mancini or Hosmer are struggling. I would lean that it probably Hosmer. I think that gives him the opportunity, and then we'll see if he can take it and see if we as fans can feel good about him at first base going into 2024.
So you're saying for sure one of those guys, your thought is it's probably Mervis. It's funny because Dan Plesac told us he believes in Hosmer bouncing back. I got my vibes are up a little bit after watching the Mancini interview. There's something I like about
We
what
ripped
he's
that ball the other day, too.
Yeah.
Oh, he was good again
Yeah.
yesterday.
Oh, yeah,
He
it
was
was
good
like
again. Again, I don't want to get too much into
I-
Cactus League, but he was good again.
I'm going to say fact. I think my choice of the group would be Morel. I think that, however they decide to start the season or where he's playing position-wise or anything, I just think at some point he can put everything together and is a guy that you're going to want out there every day and with his versatility. I wanted to say Brennan Davis, but in thinking that the only way that that happens is if something else is bad. Seiya is hurt longer than they want, or Cody Bellinger is not, is reaching an unplayable level.
I just said by the end of the season, what if it's Happ is traded at the deadline?
That's what I was going to say. Is like as far
man.
as like for me, I wanted to lean fantasy, but if I were to pick fact, it would be because we're saying right now that Ian Happ doesn't sign an extension and Jed trades him at the trade deadline, and then you got 2 months and Brennan Davis eventually takes over that left field spot. That's if I'm going to say fact, that's probably the the scenario that I'd lean is more likely. I don't know that I'm going to completely say fact it just because we don't know that that's going to happen.
I think like Mervis is in this category too, but I believe if Brennan Davis is healthy and he looks healthy in spring training, you're going to want to get him back playing and comfortable and all of that. If that's a AAA, fine, whatever. I just feel like he's going to be one of those guys where when he gets the opportunity, he's going to stick. He's going to keep it. So if that happens this year, then I think he's that answer.
I'm going fact on this one because I think at least two of the three, they would have to really struggle for it not to happen by the end of the season in the next season, and that is Mervis and Brennan Davis, because the Cubs are going to want to find out if they're the future or not eventually, and so they're going to give them enough playing time for that to happen. Madrigal and Morel, I'm not as sure, but they're, for different reasons, it could happen for them. If Madrigal's getting 3 hits and taking walks, well, then I can see how they will find a way to make him the Zobrist or whoever. However they can get him into the lineup, they'll go ahead and do it. Same thing for Morel. But I think specifically Brennan Davis, I'll be stunned if he's not starting for the Cubs in one of the outfield positions by this time next year.
I know you
struggles.
I know you didn't mean it this way, but Nick Madrigal wishes he could be Ben Zobrist.
Yes.
In his wildest dreams.
I'm not saying he's Ben Zobrist. No.
I know.
I'm not. If he is Ben Zobrist, then we got a great trade.
Ideally, I would love it to be Brennan Davis as a guy we feeling really good about going into next year because I think he has the higher upside if you compare him and Mervis. But we just don't know what this outfield situation looks like.
Right.
We have to watch the season play out.
You got other a lot of their top prospects are outfielders.
Right.
I mean, you have,
and that's why
Kennard, you
Another
have
reason
Pico
why the
Armstrong.
Happ thing is kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
I think it makes it a lot different of a situation comparably to guys from the past like Contreras or Rizzo or Bryan or Baez. Because if things just go to what we expect, which is an 80-win team, and you have those outfield prospects coming up next year, you're thinking that this team is trending up. You're not thinking about this team selling half the bullpen at the deadline or selling, 5 guys that are position players like they have the last couple of years. You know what I mean? Like, you're not thinking that they're going to be selling a bunch of. They could sell. They could trade.
You're thinking for 2024.
Right. You're thinking about you're thinking about the team trending up. So you're not talking about or thinking about trading all these dudes. So I think Happ's situation is a lot different compared to the rest of them. But
the Happ situation is it's gonna be so dependent on what the Cubs do as a team overall. In my opinion, like it would be hard if they're in a position to make the playoffs. It would be very hard to predict that they're going to trade Ian Happ, even if he has not signed an extension by the trade deadline. If they're in a position where they're in first place, they have a sizable lead, and you said, like, will they actually trade Ian Happ? Like, will they make their team, on paper worse by trading, at this point,
play for the future,
right? Like
they
if
would
he's
be-
having,
Well, and
if
What would
he's
be
having-
more
that,
important to the future,
right.
making the playoffs or
a
setting
lot
the
of that
roster?
would
I don't
also
know.
depend on, and we can't answer that, but you'd have to, if you're thinking the way we're talking about Hap specifically, like you'd have to be really sure on what Brennan is doing and that you're going to elevate, we're getting probably like crazy with PCA, but I think he's that good. But like you'd have to be very confident that those guys are ready to be jumping levels and sticking at those positions. Because at this point, like if Bellinger is really good, you're likely going to lose him or at least have to pony up to keep him again, right? That's the whole point of the contract that he signed. Seiya, now we're waiting on this oblique, so it's a little hard to say exactly.
Yeah.
And, Hap is coming off his best year. So there's a lot that you kind of have to be paying attention to all at once to make those decisions, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions I had, the last one was going to be the Cubs will be buyers, not sellers at the deadline, but I feel like we've kind of touched on that a little bit. Like, I think a lot of people believe that they're going to be potentially a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Like it could go both ways. So I don't want to do that. Let's just keep it simple. The Cubs will make the playoffs in 2023. Fact or fantasy?
I'd probably lean fantasy off the bat.
Oh,
Your gut reaction says
gut
it's
reaction is
fantasy. It's
fantasy.
too hard.
I don't think they can win a wild card against some of the teams that will be competing for one. There's a lot of teams in the East and the West that are going to be right there at the top of that wild card.
Well, they could finish
list.
second in their division and still not be a wild
That's what
card
I'm
team.
saying.
Yeah.
So it feels like, as far as like maybe easiest path to the playoffs go is winning the Central. Do I think that they've completely put themselves, ahead of the Cardinals? No, I don't know for sure that they even put themselves ahead of the Brewers yet, because a lot of these moves they have a lot of ifs. Same with a lot of these other teams, a lot of ifs and question marks on the team. So I'm gonna go right now off my gut, just knowing what I know about all these teams, and say fantasy. Hey, surprise me. So surprise me, right? Like, they prove me wrong.
Prove me wrong.
I think if I have to choose between the two, I'm probably leaning fantasy, but I think unlike more than last year, like I think this group does have a chance to put things together and especially, play into a wild card position. I think, again, like baseball is baseball, right? Like that's the expert analysis you guys come here for. Baseball is baseball.
Yeah,
It's very unpredictable. It's a very long season. Things happen, but the Cardinals roster is just, I think, quite a bit better than either the Brewers or the Cubs. I would take the Cubs over the Brewers. I don't really get the Brewers hype in some of those prediction models and things like that. The Cardinals, it's a good roster. And so I think some stuff would have to not go well for them. But again, like these things happen. And so I do think that's possible. Yeah. But I think it's possible for this group to come together. You get resurgent seasons from some of these guys. I think they can play their way into a playoff spot. We'd have to see. At the time, I would be unsure. Yeah. I also, because we were talking about it, I do just want to note, and the chat is talking about it, Edwin Rios homered again as the Cubs are playing right now. I'm very quickly in on Edwin Rios. I liked the signing when they made it.
Fact
but
or
just
fantasy? Oh, fantasy.
Fact on Edwin Rios. Like, I was in on the signing as a flyer, like try it out. But the dude just smacks the ball. I mean, he hits the ball with such authority. Get the strikeouts down just a little bit, right? And just let him mash away from the left side. Like I'm really in on that.
All right, we have to get to some ad reads. We're running out of time on the podcast. The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program is committed to helping families and businesses in the communities we serve manage energy usage and lower energy bills now and into the future. ComEd offers a wide array of incentives on lighting and other efficiency upgrades to commercial, industrial, public sector customers of all sizes across their territory. Customers can inquire about how to upgrade their outdated lighting to energy and money-saving efficient LEDs. Learn more about network lighting to operate your lights through your mobile device and track your facility's energy usage and more. Incentives have recently increased for indoor, outdoor lighting and network lighting controls, making these projects even more cost-effective. Visit ComEd.com/poweringbiz now to start saving money and energy. And to start a project, contact them at 1-855-433-2700. For more information, you can also email them at businessee@comed.com or publicsectoree@comed.com.
No, I will say what we were just talking about. I do think the Cubs have potential, a lot better potential this year to be playing meaningful September games. Even if I don't think right now they'll make the playoffs, they will be playing meaningful September games, in my opinion. And if you want to go to any of those meaningful September games, you should get your tickets on Game Time.
Yeah.
Game Time is the hottest new ticketing site that makes it easier than ever to score the best deals on tickets to sports, concerts, and shows. Ever dreamed of sitting in a seat you never thought you could? 50-yard line, courtside, behind home plate, floor seats at a concert. It's possible with the Game Time app. The biggest last-minute price drops can be found on the seats you thought you could never buy. You won't find a better deal this season on Cubs tickets. Game Time is created by the fans for the fans, and it guarantees the lowest price. If you love CHGO, then you'll love Game Time. The best way to support us is by buying your tickets through the link in the description. Join over 15 million people who have downloaded the Game Time app and score the best seats to all your favorite events.
That said, give me fact. The Cubs are going to make the playoffs, goddammit. We're going to manifest it every single day if I fucking have to. I think that the only way that they'll be able to do it is through the division. I like the Cubs pitching more than I do the Cardinals pitching. I know the Brewers pitching is better than anyone else's, but I also think the Brewers could be selling at the deadline. They don't want to pay Corbin Burns. There's a lot of bad vibes in that camp right now, in my opinion. I'm probably going to be wrong about this, but we're manifesting, so don't yell at me. Anyway.
Fly the W.
Yeah.
High on vibes. Hashtag vibe with us. Dustin Allen, Super Chat, $1.99. He says Edwin Rios home run. What is that emoji?
It's like,
It's a,
I don't know how to describe it.
I know what it means, but
Like
I
a
don't
flex?
know
It's a
how
little
to.
bit of a flex?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean,
Flex.
I'm looking at
I
it.
know when
on,
to use
like,
it.
Right.
Okay.
I know when to use it.
I'm
in,
looking
like,
at it on Twitter. We're looking at about like
'Cause I thought it was gas at first,
4:15
I guess.
to center from Rios. I don't know if I can't hear it because we're on a live podcast, but if Pat Hughes is or was on the call today, we would be breaking out the tape measure.
Breaking out the tape measure. Did you see Jordan Bastian's tweet today of PCA sitting and talking to Billy Williams
Yep.
in Arizona? And I think that's one of the things that I've always liked about the Cubs organization. And I know that other organizations do it too. But right now, specifically, what I like about it is to have somebody as young as PCA, not even close. What did we say he is yesterday? 20, 21, 20?
I think he turns 21 this
I
month.
mean, the fact that he's probably has no idea what Billy Williams looked like on a baseball field. He knows he's a Hall of Famer, but that he's willing to take time and talk and listen to a guy who may have played the game a long time ago, but still might have something to tell him that helps him down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Someday, some game, maybe it's a routine going in that's still valid today that was valid then. It's a great photo, and I love that the Cubs still bring those guys back, whether it's Fergie, Billy, Sano in the day, Sandberg does a lot of work, Sutcliffe
Absolutely.
coming around in the spring, helping guys out. I love the old generation, especially the greats, but any of the old generation. If it's Dexter Fowler there for a couple days, if it's John Lester, I haven't seen it yet, but if it happens, like that's what I want to see is former great Cubs helping future great Cubs.
John just calls Justin Steele. He's in a
right.
deer stand or drinking Bud Light on a golf course, so he can't make it to talk to Justin Steele too often. Just calls him on the phone. But give me, if we're manifesting stuff, give me Matt. I want a photo of Matt Mervis, and Derek Lee. That's what I'm manifesting.
Oh,
That's
that
what
would
I
be
want.
a good guy.
Yeah.
Well, you want to see more D. Lee at Cubs convention and
I want
everywhere.
to give me more Derek Lee anything on
more
marquee
2000s.
everywhere.
Documentaries.
Absolutely.
We need more.
Ramos
2000s
Ramirez.
What about a
Cubs.
Ramos?
Absolutely.
The millennials are begging for it. I promise
Yeah.
you. I'm not that I don't like Billy or any of the other ones, but just like give us something that's from our era, man.
The youth.
Cody
the
wants
youth
Sammy
need it.
Sosa.
Yeah, bring back.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's what we're
Don't
really
get me on the tangent. The
manifesting.
show's almost over.
D. Lee was not a superstar in baseball, but a really good player for a long time. And I think he was maybe not appreciated nationally like he should have been because he was quiet.
superstar season in 05,
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
best
Yeah, I mean,
seasons I've ever watched.
Some great
Yeah.
seasons. He's just not a vocal bat flip, look at me, other
Yes.
than when he challenged Zambrano in the
And
dugout.
Chris Young.
And Chris Young.
At Chris Young. Yeah.
I think I agree with that, and just because we were talking about him, I mean, I think if you were talking about the last, I don't know, couple decades of Cubs baseball, I think if you asked who's the most underrated player in Cubs history for, the last 20, 30 years, I think you have a fight between Kyle Hendricks and Aramis Ramirez, and they duke it out for who was the least appreciated for
That's
how much
tough.
they actually contributed on the field.
You could throw a lot of guys into that conversation for sure. By the way, on tomorrow's podcast, we're going to sit down with Stu from Club 400 in studio. Club 400, if you don't know, is the ultimate Cubs fan cave that turned into an events location in his house. Mm-hmm. It really is unbelievable. It's not just a fan cave. It's a location for events. They have Cubs players come out there throughout the season, and we have some breaking news about some of that coming up tomorrow. There may be more than one location before too long.
I was getting ready to say, he's
working a little something.
He's working on something else that goes with it. So we'll talk to him more about that tomorrow. From my conversation with him about coming on the show, he's really excited. So
Cool.
He's a good dude.
He is
That'll
a
be
good
fun.
guy.
That'll be fun.
So Stu's going to come in. Corey, thanks for coming in today. We've got more to talk with Cubs baseball tomorrow, so we'll be back here at 1:20.
Shout out.
Stu's going to be in the building on our set. That's right. Get off my lawn, Colada says to the Cardinal fans that have joined the chat today.
Thank you for being
Thanks for
so
checking
bold to
out
come
the
check us out.
CHGO Cubs podcast presented by DraftKings, America's top-rated sportsbook. Make sure you download the app and then use the promo code CHGO when you sign up. We'll see you Tuesday live at 1:20 right here on YouTube. Until then, fly the W.